Sass, the woman who became moms. Vincent Caruso's hand froze on the doorknob when he heard his daughter Lotte floating down from upstairs. That wasn't unusual. What made his blood run cold was what came next. "Mommy, you're so silly," followed by his son's voice adding, "Mom, can we have pancakes for breakfast tomorrow?" Vincent had been a widower for 3 years. His wife Maria was dead, so who were his children calling mom? He pushed open the door to the playroom and saw her. Lucia, the maid he'd hired 18 months ago. Sitting cross-legged on the floor with his kids draped all over her like she was their whole world. And maybe she was. That was the problem. If you've ever wondered what matters more, the title you give someone or the role they actually fill in your life, then this story is for you. And if it touches something deep in your heart, if it makes you think about the people who show up when others walk away, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We bring you stories like this every week. Stories that remind us what family really means. Vincent Caruso had built his empire on fear and respect, crawling out of the shadows of organized crime that had consumed his father and grandfather before him. By 40, he ran a legitimate construction empire worth hundreds of millions, but the whispers still followed him. Once a Caruso, always a Caruso. Once connected to the families, never really free. He'd worked himself nearly to death trying to prove the world wrong. Trying to build something clean his children could inherit without shame. And in the process, he'd abandoned them in every way that mattered. Maria's death from an aneurysm had been sudden and devastating. One moment she was laughing at the breakfast table. The next she was collapsed on the kitchen floor. Gone before the ambulance even arrived. Vincent had been in Seattle closing a deal when he got the call. By the time he made it home, his wife was already at the morgue and his children, 7-year-old Marco and 5-year-old Julia, were being watched by a neighbor who kept looking at them with pity that made Vincent want to break things. He'd tried, in those first months, to be both parents. He'd cut back on travel, hired a rotation of nannies, attempted to maintain some semblance of routine. But grief had hollowed him out. Left him a shell going through motions. And the children, drowning in their own loss, needed more than motions. They needed someone fully present. And Vincent couldn't be that person. Every corner of their New Jersey estate reminded him of Maria. Every meal without her felt wrong. Every bedtime routine incomplete. So he'd done what Caruso's always did when things got hard. He worked, he traveled, he built and expanded and acquired. Telling himself it was for them, for their future. When really it was because focusing on deals and contracts was easier than facing 2 pairs of eyes that looked just like their mothers. The nannies came and went. Some quit because the children were difficult, acting out their grief in ways that required patience the hired help didn't have. Some left because Vincent's hours were impossible, his expectations unrealistic. Some were let go because Vincent didn't trust them. Didn't like how they disciplined or fed or talked to his kids. For 2 years, it was a revolving door of strangers. And Marco and Julia withdrew further into themselves with each new face. Then Lucia arrived. She came through an agency. A 32-year-old Italian immigrant with limited English, but glowing references from families she'd worked for in Rome and Milan. Vincent hired her because she was professional and experienced, and because frankly, he was desperate. He gave her the same speech he'd given all the others. Keep the children fed, clean, on schedule. Make sure homework gets done. Don't let them watch too much TV. Call if there's an emergency. He'd be in Tokyo for a week. He'd expected her to last maybe a month. They all left eventually. But when he returned from Tokyo something was different. The house felt warmer somehow. There was music playing softly in the kitchen. He could smell something baking. An aroma that reminded him painfully of Maria's Sunday cooking. And when he found the children, they were helping Lucia make pasta from scratch. Their hands covered in flour, giggling as she taught them to roll the dough, speaking to them in melodic Italian mixed with broken English. "Papa," Julia had run to him, throwing floury arms around his legs. Lucia teaching us to make like Nana used to make. Marco had been more reserved, as he'd become since Maria's death, but there was a light in his eyes that had been absent for months. "She knows all the old recipes, Dad. the ones Mom used to make. Vincent had felt something twist in his chest. Relief that his children seemed happy. Jealousy that it was someone else making them feel that way. Guilt that he hadn't been the one to think of teaching them their grandmother's recipes. Connecting them to their heritage, giving them something tangible from their past. As good, Lucy had asked him nervously, her English stilted but earnest. I hope is okay I teach them. They ask about their mama's cooking, and I think maybe help them feel close to her. It's fine, Vincent had said curtly, not knowing how to process the complicated emotions swirling in his chest. Thank you. That had been the beginning. Over the following months, as Vincent continued his pattern of brief presences between long absences, Lucia had woven herself into the fabric of his children's lives. She learned English rapidly, picking it up from the kids and from television, and from the other household staff. She established routines that gave Marco and Julia stability. She was there every morning for breakfast, every afternoon for homework, every evening for dinner and baths and bedtime stories. She attended parent-teacher conferences when Vincent was traveling. She coached Julia through friendship drama and helped Marco with his science projects. She remembered to pack snacks for soccer practice and showed up to every game, cheering louder than any of the actual parents. And Vincent had been grateful. Had told himself that this was perfect, that Lucia was exactly what the children needed. He'd increased her salary twice without her asking. He'd given her more authority in household decisions. He'd started to rely on her judgment in ways he'd never relied on the previous nannies. But he'd also maintained his distance, treating her as exceptional staff rather than acknowledging she'd become something more essential. The reckoning came on a February evening when Vincent's meeting in Chicago wrapped up early. The investors had gotten cold feet. Spooked by some investigative journalist digging into the Caruso family history, writing an article about how organized crime families laundered their reputations. The deal was dead, and Vincent found himself flying home a day ahead of schedule, angry and frustrated, and feeling like no matter what he did, he'd never escape his family's shadow. He'd arrived at the estate around 8 in the evening, letting himself in quietly, not wanting to alert the staff. He'd planned to pour himself a scotch in his study and brood. But as he'd walked through the foyer, he'd heard voices and laughter from upstairs. Marco and Julia should have been asleep by now, but they clearly weren't, and curiosity had pulled him toward the sound. That's when he'd heard it. His daughter's voice, clear as crystal, calling Lucia, Mommy. And his son agreeing that yes, they could have pancakes with Mom tomorrow. Vincent had felt the world tilt. He'd pushed open the playroom door to find them there, Lucia in jeans and a sweater, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, building a blanket fort with his children. They'd all frozen when they saw him, Marco and Julia's faces shifting from joy to worriness. That careful expression children get when they're not sure how an adult will react. And Lucia had gone pale, immediately understanding the problem. Mr. Caruso. I can explain. She'd started, her English much improved but still accented. Kids, go to your rooms. Vincent had said, his voice tight with controlled fury. But Papa, we didn't finish. Julia had begun. Now. They'd scurried out, casting worried glances back at Lucia, and that had made it worse. They were worried about her, not about disappointing him. They were looking to her for reassurance, not their father. Once the children were gone, Vincent had turned the full force of his anger on Lucia. How long has this been going on? I don't understand. She'd stood her ground, which surprised him. How long have they been calling you Mom? Lucia had taken a breath, meeting his eyes steadily. Maybe 4 months. Maybe 5. I tell them to stop, many times. I say, I am Lucia, not Mama. But especially Julia, she is young, she doesn't remember her mama so clear anymore, and it slips out. And I think maybe is cruel to make her feel bad about it. So I stop correcting all the time. You let my children call you by their dead mother's title. And you think that's appropriate? No, is not appropriate, I know this. But Mr. Caruso, with respect, those children need a mother. Not a replacement. Never a replacement, but someone who does what a mother does. Who is there when they wake up scared in the night? Who knows they like their sandwiches cut diagonal, not straight? Who remembers that Marco gets stomachache when nervous and Julia needs extra hugs on rainy days, because rain was falling when her mama died? Someone has to do these things, and you are not here. The words had hit Vincent like physical blows. I'm working. I'm building something for them. You are hiding, Lucia had said, her voice softer now but no less firm. You are hiding from the grief and from them because it's too painful to be here without your wife. I understand this. But they are children. And they don't understand why Papa is never home. They think maybe they did something wrong. They think maybe you don't want them. That's ridiculous. Everything I do is for them. No, Mr. Caruso. Everything you do is for you. To make yourself feel better, to prove something to the world. The children don't need an empire. They need a father. Vincent had wanted to fire her on the spot. Wanted to throw her out of his house for her presumption. For letting his children call her mom, for speaking to him with such brutal honesty. But beneath the anger was a terrible recognition that she was right. He'd been absent. He'd been hiding. He'd let his children be raised by an employee while he chased redemption for sins that weren't even his. Trying to clean a family name that would always be dirty to some people no matter what he did. You're fired, he'd said, the words escaping before he could think them through. Pack your things. I want you out tonight. Lucia's face had crumpled, tears filling her eyes, but she'd held his gaze. You do what you need to do, but before I go I say this, Marco. He fails his last 2 math tests because he stays up at night worrying you won't come home. Julia, she wets the bed again, something she hasn't done in years. Because she has nightmares that everyone she loves disappears. They are hurting Mr. Caruso, and you don't even see it because you are not here to see it. So yes, fire me. Bring in someone new. But please be here for them. They already lose their mama, don't make them lose their papa too. She'd walked past him, then, headed for her room to pack, and Vincent had stood there feeling like the ground had opened beneath him. How had he not known Marco was failing math? When had Julia started wetting the bed again? What else was happening in his children's lives that he was completely unaware of? He'd walked slowly to Marco's room first, knocking gently before entering. His son was sitting on his bed, knees pulled up to his chest, looking small and scared. As Lucia leaving, Marco had asked immediately. Vincent had sat down on the edge of the bed. Yes. It's not appropriate for you to call her mom. Why not? Marco's voice had been sharp with sudden anger. She does everything Mom used to do. She's here. She cares about us. You're never here, Dad. You're always somewhere else, and when you are home, you're either in your office or looking at us like we make you sad. Lucia doesn't look at us like that. She's happy to see us. She wants to be with us. So yeah, sometimes we call her Mom, because that's what she is to us now. The accusation in his 9-year-old son's voice had been devastating. Marco. I know I haven't been around as much as I should. As much as you should. Dad, you missed my birthday last month. You said you'd be home. And then you called from London saying the trip got extended. Lucia made me a cake from scratch and threw me a party with my friends. You sent a present that your assistant picked out. So don't tell me about what you should do. Just go back to work. That's what you're good at. Vincent had felt his son's words like knife wounds. He'd forgotten Marco's birthday. He'd promised he'd be there, and then a deal had come up. And he'd convinced himself that Marco would understand, that he could make it up to him later. But there was no making up a missed 9th birthday. There was no later that could replace being present in the moment. He'd tried to find words, but Marco had turned away from him, facing the wall. Just go, Dad. You're good at that. Vincent had gone to Julia's room next. His 7-year-old daughter had been crying into her pillow, and when she'd seen him, she'd run to him, throwing her arms around his waist. Please don't make Lucia go. She'd sobbed, Pa. I'll be good, I promise. I'll stop calling her mommy if you want. Just please don't make her leave. She's the only one who stays. The only one who stays. His daughter's greatest fear was abandonment, and Vincent had been unconsciously teaching her that everyone eventually leaves. His wife had died. He disappeared constantly for work. Nannies had come and gone in an endless rotation before Lucia. And now he was sending away the one person who'd been consistent in her life. Vincent had held his daughter while she cried, and for the first time in 3 years, he'd let himself cry too. For Maria, for the father he was failing to be, for the childhood his children were losing, because he couldn't face his own pain. When Julia had finally cried herself out, Vincent had tucked her into bed, and then gone downstairs to his study. He'd poured that scotch he'd been planning on earlier. But instead of drinking it, he'd just stared at it, thinking about the choices that had brought him to this moment. His phone had buzzed with a text from his sister Angela, the only family member he was still close to. "Heard you're home early. Everything okay?" He'd called her instead of texting back, and when she'd answered, everything had come pouring out. The kids calling Lucia mom. His confrontation with her. The things Marco and Julia had said to him. His complete failure as a parent. Angela had listened to all of it, and then she'd said simply, "Vincent, do you remember when Papa died, and you promised me you'd never be like him? That you'd never choose business over family. That you'd break the cycle." "I'm nothing like Papa," Vincent had protested. "I'm trying to build something legitimate, something clean." "You're exactly like Papa, just in a different way. He was never home because he was out doing God knows what illegal activity. You're never home because you're trying to prove you're not him. But the result is the same. Absent father, children raising themselves, family falling apart." The comparison had stung because it was true. His father had been a bastard, violent and cruel when he was around, absent most of the time. Vincent had sworn he'd be different. But he'd ended up achieving the same result through different means. "What do I do?" he'd asked his sister, feeling lost in a way he hadn't since he was a child. "You apologize, to Lucia, to your kids, to yourself, and then you show up. Not just physically but emotionally, you be present. You do the hard work of actually being a parent instead of just funding their lives from a distance. And Vincent, you let that woman stay. Because from everything you've told me, she loves your children, and they love her. And that's not something to throw away out of pride or jealousy or whatever this is." After hanging up with Angela, Vincent had sat in his study for a long time, thinking about Maria. She'd been the one who kept him grounded, who reminded him that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. Before she'd gotten pregnant with Marco, Vincent had been exactly like his father, ruthless and driven and willing to sacrifice anything for power and money. Maria had changed him, had shown him a different way to be. And when she'd died, he'd lost his anchor. Drifted back toward the patterns he'd grown up with. He'd gone to Maria's office, the small room where she'd paid bills and planned meals and track of the family's life. He hadn't been in there since her death. Had kept it locked like a shrine. But now he'd opened the door and found everything exactly as she'd left it. Her calendar still open to the week she'd died. Her handwriting on sticky notes about picking up Julia from ballet. About Marco's doctor's appointment. About ordering more Vincent's favorite coffee. In the desk drawer, he'd found a letter addressed to him in her handwriting. His hands had shaken as he'd opened it, recognizing it as one of several she'd written in the months before her death, when she'd been feeling off. When she'd had a sense that something wasn't right even though the doctors kept saying she was fine. "My darling Vincent," it had read. "If you're reading this, then my feeling was right and something has happened to me. I want you to know that I'm not afraid of dying. What I'm afraid of is leaving you and the children without giving you some guidance for how to move forward. You have to let yourself grieve, but then you have to live again. Not for me, but for yourself and for Marco and Julia. They will need you more than ever. And you cannot let your pain make you absent. I know how you deal with difficult emotions, how you bury yourself in work and activity to avoid feeling. You cannot do that this time. Our children need their father present and whole, not hiding from them. Find someone to help you. Don't try to do this alone. Whether it's your sister or a friend or a nanny you trust, let people in. Let them help raise our babies. And Vincent, if you find someone else someday, someone who can love you and the children, don't push that away out of loyalty to me. I want you to be happy. I want our children to have love in their lives. Even if it comes from someone who isn't me. Promise me you'll let yourself live, truly live, not just exist. Vincent had read the letter 3 times. Tears streaming down his face. Maria had known him so well, had predicted exactly what he would do and had tried to guide him away from it. But he hadn't been strong enough to follow her wishes. He'd done everything she'd warned against. And now he was paying the price. He'd gone upstairs to where Lucia's room was on the 3rd floor, knocking softly on her door. She'd answered still dressed, clearly not having started packing, and her eyes had been red from crying. I owe you an apology, Vincent had said, for how I spoke to you, for the accusations I made, for not seeing what you've done for my children. Lucia had stood in the doorway, waiting wary. My wife left me a letter before she died, telling me to let people help, to not push away someone who could love our children. I didn't listen to her wisdom then, but I'm listening now. I'm asking you to stay. Not just as an employee, but as someone who's essential to this family. And I'm asking you to help me learn how to be the father they need, because clearly I don't know how to do this. And if they call me Mama, Lucia had asked quietly, then we'll talk to them together about it. Explain that you're not replacing their mother, but that you're someone who loves them, and takes care of them. We'll figure out what feels right for everyone. Lucia had studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I stay. But Mr. Caruso, you have to stay too. In their lives, you have to be here, really here. Not just visiting between trips. I will be. I'm going to change how I run my business, delegate more, travel less. And please call me Vincent. We're going to be partners in raising these kids. The next morning, Vincent had gathered Marco and Julia and Lucia in the living room. The children had been nervous, clearly expecting bad news. But Vincent had spoken from the heart in a way he'd never done before. I've been a terrible father, he'd begun, and both children had started to protest, but he'd held up a hand. No, let me say this. I thought I was being a good dad by working hard and providing for you, but I've been absent when you needed me present. I missed your birthday, Marco. And I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were struggling in math or that you were worried about me not coming home. Julia. I didn't know you were having nightmares again, and I should have known. It's my job to know those things. It's okay, Papa. Julia had said softly, but Vincent had shaken his head. It's not okay, baby. But I'm going to do better. I'm going to be home more. I'm going to come to your games and help with homework and be here for dinner and bedtime. I'm going to learn how to be the dad you deserve. What about Lucia? Marco had asked, the question carrying so much weight. Lucia is staying, she's part of our family. And I'm grateful for everything she does for you. But I want to talk about something. About you calling her mom. Both children had frozen. Fear crossing their faces, but Vincent had continued quickly. Your mama, my Maria, she was special and irreplaceable. No one will ever take her place, not ever. But Lucia does things for you that a mom would do, and it makes sense that you'd feel that way about her. So here's what I think. If you want to call her Mama Lucia, to show that she's like a mom to you but different from the mom you had, that would be okay. What do you think? The children had looked at Lucia, who had tears in her eyes. I would be honored, she'd said softly. If that's what you want, Mama Lucia. Julia had tried it out then smiled. I like it. Marco had been more thoughtful. What about Mom? Can we still talk about Mom? Always. Vincent had said firmly. We should talk about her more, remember her together. Lucia, maybe you could help us with that. Tell the kids stories about their mother, keep her memory alive. Of course, Lucia had agreed. Your mama, she was beautiful person from everything I learned. We honor her by remembering her, and we honor her by being happy too. The months that followed were an education in actually being a parent. Vincent cut his travel by 70%, restructured his business so that his executives handled most of the day-to-day operations, and made it clear to everyone that his children came first. He attended every one of Marco's soccer games, even the early Saturday morning ones when he'd rather be sleeping. He learned to braid Julia's hair, though his attempts were nowhere near as good as Lucia's. He helped with homework and cooked dinner and read bedtime stories, stumbling through the routines that Lucia had long since mastered. He and Lucia developed a partnership, meeting each Sunday to discuss the week ahead, any concerns with the children, what was working and what wasn't. At first it was awkward, the employer-employee dynamic clashing with the reality that they were co-parenting. But gradually they found their rhythm. Lucia felt comfortable pushing back when she disagreed with Vincent's decisions, and Vincent learned to trust her judgment, recognizing that she knew the children in ways he was still learning. Marco's math grades improved with Ensign's help and extra tutoring. Julia's nightmares became less frequent as both Vincent and Lucia reassured her that they weren't going anywhere. The bedwetting stopped, and slowly, the worriness in the children's eyes when they looked at their father faded, replaced by trust and affection. It was during a family dinner in late spring, everyone laughing at something silly Julia had said, that Vincent realized he was happy. Genuinely happy for the first time since Maria's death. The house felt like a home again, filled with warmth and life. And looking around the table at his children and at Lucia, who had been instrumental in making this possible, Vincent felt a surge of gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. Over the following months, Vincent became aware of a shift in his feelings toward Lucia. She was beautiful, he'd always known that in an abstract way. But now he noticed the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the grace with which she moved, the warmth in her voice when she spoke to the children. He noticed the way his day felt brighter when he saw her, the way he looked forward to their Sunday planning sessions, the way he found excuses to spend time in whatever room she was in. It scared him, these feelings that were developing. It felt like a betrayal of Maria. Even though Maria's letter had explicitly given him permission to find happiness again. And it was complicated by the fact that Lucia worked for him. That there was an inherent power imbalance that made any romantic interest potentially inappropriate. But the feelings persisted and grew. Until Vincent found himself confiding in his sister Angela again. "I think I have feelings for Lucia," he'd admitted over coffee one Saturday while Angela was visiting and the kids were at a birthday party. "Of course you do," Angela had said, completely unsurprised. "You'd have to be blind not to. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing. It's inappropriate. She works for me. And Maria told you to find someone else," Angela had interrupted. "And from what you've told me, Lucia is exactly the kind of person Maria would have wanted for you and the kids. Someone kind and loving who puts the children first. So why are you fighting this?" "Because I don't want to make things complicated or uncomfortable. What we have now, it works. Why risk ruining it?" "Because life is short, Vincent. You of all people should know that. Maria died at 36 with no warning. You could die tomorrow. Lucia could meet someone else. Don't waste time being afraid when you could be building something beautiful." Vincent had thought about his sister's words for weeks, watching Lucia with the children, trying to gauge if there was any indication she might feel the same way about him. Sometimes he'd catch her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. But he was afraid to hope it meant what he wanted it to mean. The decision was taken out of his hands one evening in June. Vincent had been putting Julia to bed when she'd asked him point blank, "Papa, do you like Mama Lucia?" "Of course I like her. She's wonderful." "No. I mean like her. Like how you liked Mama before you got married." Vincent had been startled by the question. "Why do you ask that?" "Because Marco says you look at her the way the prince looks at the princess in my storybook. And I think she looks at you that way too sometimes. So I wondered if maybe you like each other." Out of the mouths of babes. Vincent had taken a breath, deciding to be honest with his daughter. "I do like her that way. But it's complicated, and I don't know if she feels the same way." Julia had smiled, looking wise beyond her 7 years. "You should ask her. Marco and I wouldn't mind if you did. We already love her, and we love you, so if you loved each other too, that would be good, right? It's not quite that simple, baby. But thank you for telling me it would be okay with you." After Julia had fallen asleep, Vincent had found Lucia in the kitchen preparing lunches for the next day, a task she did every evening with meticulous care. She'd looked up when he'd entered, smiling in greeting. "Julia, go down okay?" Eventually, after asking me if I like you, Lucia had frozen her hand still holding a sandwich. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I do like you. More than like you, if I'm being completely honest." Lucia had set down the sandwich carefully, turning to face him fully. "Mr. Caruso, Vincent. Please. Vincent, this is very complicated situation, I know, believe me I know, I'm your employer. There's a power dynamic issue, there's the kids to consider, there's Maria's memory. But Julia's question made me realize I've been afraid to even explore the possibility of something more between us when maybe I shouldn't be. And if I say I don't feel the same way, then what happens? I lose my job, the children lose me, everything we build falls apart." Vincent had heard the fear in her voice and recognized it for what it was. Not a lack of feeling, but a fear of acknowledging feelings that could change everything. "No. If you don't feel the same way, then nothing changes. We continue as we are, partners in raising the kids, I promise you that. Your place in this family is secure regardless of whether you have romantic feelings for me." Lucia had studied him for a long moment, then taken a deep breath. "I do have feelings for you. Since maybe 6 months, I start to notice. The way you are with the children now, so different from when I first arrived. The way you listen and try to be better. The way you make them laugh and how you are learning to braid Julia's hair, even you are terrible at it." Despite the tension, Vincent had smiled. "I'm getting better at the braids." "You are terrible," Lucia had said, but there was affection in her voice. "But you try, and that matters. You try so hard to be good father, and watching you change, watching you become the man you are now, it makes me fall for you. But I am so scared, Vincent. If this goes wrong I lose everything. Not just job but Marco and Julia, they are my heart now, I cannot risk losing them. Then we go slowly. We date, see how it feels, make sure this is real for both of us before we change anything for the kids. And Lucia, you won't lose them. Whether this works out between us or not, you're part of their lives now. That doesn't change." They had started dating in secret, which felt ridiculous given that they lived in the same house. But they'd wanted to be sure before they told the children. Vincent took Lucia to dinner in the city on her nights off, to restaurants where they were unlikely to run into anyone they knew. They went for long walks in parks, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other in ways that went beyond logistics and parenting. Lucia told him about growing up poor in a small village outside Rome. How she'd worked as a nanny for wealthy families to save money to move to America. She'd wanted to open her own preschool someday, to create a warm and nurturing environment for children who needed it. Vincent told her about the weight of the Caruso name, about trying to redeem a family legacy built on violence and corruption. About the constant fear that he'd fail and his children would suffer for it. They discovered they both loathed Italian films and terrible American sitcoms. That they both were morning people who enjoyed quiet coffee before the chaos of the day. That they both believed in honest communication, even when it was difficult. In working through problems rather than running from them. And when Vincent finally kissed her for the first time, standing under a streetlight after dinner in Little Italy, it felt like coming home. Not a replacement for what he'd had with Maria, but something new and precious in its own right. After 2 months of secret dating, they decided to tell the children. They gathered Marco and Julia one Sunday afternoon, and explained that they'd been spending time together. That they cared about each other as more than just co-parents and wanted to see where it might lead. The children's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Finally, Marco had exclaimed, "We've been waiting for you guys to figure it out." "You knew." Vincent had been stunned. "Dad, you're not subtle," Marco had said with the exasperation only a 10-year-old could muster. "You smile every time Lucia walks in the room. And she does the same when you come home. It's been obvious." Julia had simply climbed into Lucia's lap and announced, "I'm glad. Now we can really be a family." Over the following year, they dated openly, navigating the challenges of blending a romantic relationship with their existing parenting partnership. There were awkward moments and disagreements. Times when they had to figure out boundaries and appropriate behavior in front of the children. But there was also joy, so much joy in building something together. Vincent proposed on the anniversary of Maria's death, in the garden where she'd planted roses that still bloomed every spring. He'd brought the children and Lucia there to place flowers on Maria's memorial stone, and after they'd spent time remembering her, sharing stories and tears, Vincent had pulled out a ring. "Maria wanted me to be happy," he'd said, looking at Lucia. "She wanted our children to be loved. And I think she'd be glad that we found you, that you brought light back into our lives. Lucia, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and the mother to these children who already love you?" Lucia had cried and said yes, and the children had cheered. And Vincent had felt Maria's presence like a blessing, a gentle approval of this new chapter. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony with just family and close friends. Marco and Julia stood up with them, and during the vows, they included a family commitment, all 4 of them promising to love and support each other, to communicate honestly, to show up even when it was hard. And they did. Vincent never returned to his old patterns of absence. He remained engaged and present, attending school events and family dinners, coaching Marco's little league team and helping Julia with her art projects. Lucia officially adopted both children. Not to replace Maria but to formalize what had already become true, she was their mother in every way that mattered. They made sure to keep Maria's memory alive, telling stories about her, visiting her memorial, celebrating her birthday as a family. And Lucy never tried to erase her or take her place, but rather honored her by loving her children with the same fierce devotion Maria would have wanted. Years later, when Vincent was asked what saved his family, he always gave the same answer: a woman who showed up when he'd checked out, who loved his children when he was too broken to, who had the courage to call him out and the grace to forgive him when he changed. And his own decision, however late it came, to finally be present, to prioritize what mattered, to let love in even when it felt complicated and scary. The message at the heart of this story is simple but profound. The titles we give people matter less than the roles they actually fill in our lives. Lucia had been just a maid, on paper. But she'd been a mother in every way that counted. And sometimes the family we need isn't the one we started with, but the one we build through choice and commitment and showing up day after day, even when it's hard. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone who showed up for you when others didn't, or if it inspired you to be more present in the lives of people you love, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this every week because we believe that hope is real, that change is possible, and that love in all its forms is worth fighting for. Thank you for being here.